Imagine hiring like a hyper-efficient digital employee.
Oh, the dream hire, right.
Exactly. I mean, this employee never sleeps. They process these incredibly complex, multi-step workflows in literally a matter of seconds. And right out of the gate, they cut your operational costs by 40%.
Which is just a staggering number for any business leader to hear.
Right. Sounds like the ultimate hire. But now, imagine that same digital employee makes a decision that you just cannot explain to a regulator. And because you lack that required transparency, it ends up costing your company 30 million euros in fines.
Yeah, that is the ultimate double-edged sword for the modern enterprise right now. I mean, the potential for scalability is massive, but the architectural and legal stakes are, well, they're entirely existential.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to extract the absolute most actionable insights from a really fascinating 2026 guide published by EtherLink.
Which, for context, is a prominent Dutch AI consulting firm.
Exactly. And for those of you tuning in here on the AI Insights by AetherLink channel, we constantly track the cutting edge of this technology. We are custom tailoring this breakdown specifically for you.
Yeah, the European business leaders, the CTOs, the developers out there.
Right, the people actively evaluating AI adoption and trying to navigate this incredibly high-stakes world of autonomous AI infrastructure.
And we really need to ground this in why it matters for you right now, like this quarter. Because this is no longer some theoretical debate about what the future of work might look like in a decade.
The clock is ticking.
Exactly. The EU AI Act enforcement phases are now in full swing across Europe. Organizations aren't just exploring anymore. They are actively scrambling. They're seeking out technical solutions that are not just capable of taking real action, but that are fully compliant, localized, and completely transparent by design.
Which is a huge structural shift.
It is. And what's incredibly telling is that Den Haag is really emerging as the epicenter for this entire movement.
Oh, wait, really? Why Den Haag specifically?
Well, it's because of its physical proximity to European regulatory bodies, and also its deeply ingrained cultural emphasis on strict governance. So it has essentially become the ultimate proving ground for enterprise AI architecture.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the jargon around this tech shift can get really thick. And to understand why regulators care so much, we kind of have to look at the mechanics of the technology itself. We're moving away from what we used to call generative AI, and we're entering the era of agentic AI.
Right, which is a massive leap.
Yeah. So think of a traditional chatbot, even a highly tuned one, as like a fast food drive-through menu. It's fundamentally reactive. You ask for a burger, it gives you a burger, but it strictly operates within a predefined conversation flow.
Yeah, if you ask for something off menu, it just breaks down. Or it requires constant human prompting. I mean, it sits idle until you give it a command, and the output is usually just text that a human then has to copy, paste, and actually act upon.
Precisely. But agentic AI, that is like hiring a highly proactive executive assistant who actually has the keys to your company's systems.
Which is both amazing and a little terrifying.
Totally.
Yeah.
This assistant doesn't just read an email and suggest a reply. It actively monitors your business environment. It anticipates a client need, independently authenticates into your CRM via an API, updates a client file, triggers an invoice in your accounting software, and sends the email.
All without you ever pressing approve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They act as true digital employees. They understand context, they adapt to changing conditions, and they work toward predefined business goals completely autonomously.
And, the underlying technical mechanism making that leap possible is what we call multimodal capabilities. Because these new agents, they aren't just reading text prompts anymore.
Right, they're doing much more than that.
Yeah, they are analyzing live voice inputs, they're interpreting unstructured visual data, and they're structuring all of that raw info into formats like JSON outputs that directly feed legacy enterprise systems in real time.
Which is a complete rewiring of how data flows through a business.
It absolutely is. And the AetherLink guide cites this McKinsey 2025 research on this exact shift. Organizations deploying these autonomous agents through structured product lines, like, say, AetherBot for the agent interface and AetherDV for the back-end integration, they're reporting a 40% reduction in operational costs.
40%? Wow.
Alongside a 35% bump in customer satisfaction metrics because, they operate 24/7 and they completely eliminate those massive data entry bottlenecks you see with manual human labor.
But see, that autonomous capability is exactly what introduces an entirely new class of risk. I mean, if a system is independently querying databases and sending invoices, a hallucination isn't just a funny, weird text response anymore.
No, it's a critical business failure.
Exactly. Which logically brings us to the stringent new EU AI Act rules. Now, I have to push back here on behalf of the skeptical CTO who's listening right now. Doesn't a massive web of regulations and mandatory audit trails and strict human-in-the-loop requirements, doesn't all of that just act as a giant bottleneck for tech innovation?
I hear that all the time.
Right. It feels like you're buying a Ferrari, but you're being forced to drive it in a school zone.
Yeah, it is a very common reaction, especially from engineering teams who are used to moving fast and breaking things. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, AetherLink's strategic philosophy, particularly through their AetherMind strategy framework, it reframes this completely.
How so?
Well, they argue that compliance is actually a business accelerator, not a burden. Think about how the EU AI Act classifies these autonomous agents. Because they handle sensitive business functions, like claims processing or financial routing, they're categorized as high-risk systems.
And the penalties there are no joke.
Oh, they are severe, up to 30 million euros or 6% of annual global revenue, whichever is higher.
Which is literally a company-ending fine for a large swath of the mid-market. So what are the actual engineering requirements to avoid that? Like, what does compliance actually look like at the code level?
You have to build it into the architecture from day one. First, you conduct AI impact assessments. That means before you even deploy the system, you are mathematically evaluating the model's risk profile.
Okay, so a proactive assessment.
Right. Second, you implement mandatory human oversight mechanisms. Architecturally, this means building confidence thresholds into the agent's logic. So, if the agent's confidence in a decision drops below 95%, it automatically pauses the workflow and flags a human in the loop for review.
That makes sense. It catches its own uncertainty.
Exactly. And third, you have to maintain immutable audit trails. Every piece of unstructured data processed, every API call made, every single decision pathway must be logged in a secure database. Add in continuous bias monitoring for demographic fairness and clear user notifications, and you essentially have a system that is fundamentally transparent.
Okay, I see the argument there. Because if you try to bolt that level of logging and oversight onto a live system after the fact,
Oh, break everything.
yeah, it will absolutely crush your latency and break your integrations.
Yeah.
But if you design the data pipelines with those audit trails natively built in, you aren't just checking a legal box. You're actually designing a system that is inherently robust and easy to debug.
Exactly. And you gain immediate market credibility. I mean, customers and enterprise partners are far more willing to integrate with your AI if they know it operates under the strictest safety and explainability standards in the world. It completely differentiates you from competitors who are still running, unregulated black box models.
But that raises an immediate logistical friction point for me. If compliance mandates logging every single decision a model makes and retaining all that context to avoid a 30 million euro fine, where does that massive log of sensitive data actually live?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right, because I noticed a specific detail in the sources that stood out. There was a really sharp contrast between US-based platforms routing data externally versus European platforms processing everything locally.
Yes, and this brings us to the crucial concept of data sovereignty, which is arguably the single biggest technical hurdle for European AI adoption. For a long time, heavily regulated European industries like banking, insurance, healthcare, they were essentially paralyzed.
Because of the privacy laws.
Right. They simply could not risk sending sensitive customer data across the Atlantic to external servers via an API call. Even if a US-based cloud provider claims to be totally secure, routing raw medical or financial data through external processing nodes introduces massive GDPR and residency risks.
Because the moment that data leaves your localized environment, you totally lose control over how it might be cached or stored, or maybe even inadvertently used in future model training runs.
Precisely. But what's happening now, and this is driven by European startups like Mistral AI and optimized by those Den Haag consultancies we mentioned, is a structural shift to local processing. We are seeing platforms that process customer data entirely within isolated EU infrastructure.
So no external routing at all.
None. Instead of making API calls to an external black box, companies are deploying smaller, highly capable, open source or proprietary European models directly onto bare metal servers within their own virtual private clouds.
Wow. Which completely changes the game for a CTO in a regulated sector. They aren't outsourcing the cognitive processing anymore. They're basically bringing the brain in-house. They finally have the green light to innovate without violating residency laws.
Exactly. They are solving the residency risk at the architectural level.
Uh,
When you evaluate an agentic AI platform today, ensuring it has EU native data processing and storage infrastructure, well, that isn't just a nice-to-have marketing feature anymore. It's a fundamental requirement for procurement.
it's table stakes.
Totally. The pressure is so intense that even the global legacy players, your Microsofts, your Anthropics, your Googles, they are having to radically restructure their offerings. They're establishing dedicated European operations and implementing GDPR-first architectures just to compete with this rising European advantage.
It really is a fascinating geopolitical shift in the tech landscape. The infrastructure has to adapt to the law, not the other way around. Okay, so the underlying tech is wildly powerful, the governance is strict but necessary, and the infrastructure is finally secured locally. But let's bring this out of the server room and down to earth.
Let's do it.
For you, the listener, does this actually translate to the bottom line of your business? Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the case study of the Den Hague insurance provider from the guide. They deployed an EU AI Act compliant agentic system, specifically to handle claims intake and initial assessments. And after just 6 months, their standard claims processing time dropped from 48 hours down to just 6 hours.
Which is a massive acceleration in an industry that is notoriously slow.
Right, and the cost per claim plummeted by 38% because the system was autonomously handling the unstructured data intake, cross-referencing policy documents, and structuring the data for final review.
The efficiency gains are just undeniable.
But here's the statistic that I really want to challenge. The guide claims employee satisfaction actually went up by 22%. Now, I have to be skeptical here. In most legacy companies, the moment you introduce automation that cuts processing time by 80%, you trigger massive workforce anxiety and fears of mass layoffs. Why did this specific case avoid that kind of revolt?
It's a great question, and it comes down to how the agents were integrated into the daily workflow. The automation wasn't designed to replace the human adjusters. It was designed to replace the most agonizing parts of their job.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, before the AI, these human workers were spending like 70% of their day manually reading poorly formatted PDFs, extracting dates and figures, and just typing them into a legacy database.
Essentially acting as human JSON parsers.
Exactly. It is soul-crushing work. By offloading the data extraction and structuring to the agentic system, the human adjusters were finally freed from that grueling grunt work. They were reallocated to complex, nuanced cases, like investigating edge case fraud or handling sensitive claims that actually required human empathy and judgment.
So it actually made their jobs better.
It drastically reduced their burnout. Oh, and on the regulatory side, 0 violations. The system passed its regulatory examination with full transparency documentation because every step the AI took was logged locally.
So overall, they generated 1.2 million euros in annual cost savings, plus a 400,000 euro revenue uplift just from improved customer retention.
Yeah.
Because, customers were getting their claims resolved in hours instead of days.
And that leads right into the specific ROI metrics that business leaders and engineering teams need to be tracking right now. Determining the return on investment for autonomous agents requires looking at 3 distinct categories.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, you have operational metrics. The gold standard here is first contact resolution, or FCR. Mature deployments are hitting 70 to 85% resolution without ever escalating to a human. This drives your cost per interaction down from roughly 15 to 25 euros with a human agent, all the way down to between 50 cents and 2 euros with an AI agent.
That is just a staggering margin improvement at scale.
It really is. Then you move to customer experience metrics. You should be looking for your customer satisfaction scores to consistently stay above 4.2 out of 5. And faster response times are correlating with a 5 to 15-point increase in Net Promoter Scores. Because the agent has access to the CRM and can execute tasks instantly, it reduces the customer's perception of effort by 40%.
That makes total sense. And the third category.
Finally, you track financial metrics. And it isn't just about avoiding costs or reducing headcount expenses. It's about revenue pipeline velocity. The guide highlights another incredible case study involving a major Dutch bank applying this to their financial services.
Walk us through the mechanics of that one, because banking is arguably the most risk-averse sector there is.
Oh, without a doubt. So the bank used a fully localized, compliant agentic AI to analyze incoming financial data, verify corporate documents, and dynamically assess risk profiles for commercial loans. Instead of a human loan officer spending days compiling data from 5 different internal systems, the AI agent authenticated across the internal network, pulled the credit history, analyzed the submitted tax documents using localized computer vision, and compiled a comprehensive risk assessment dossier.
And what was the time savings there?
They reduced their loan approval cycles from 5 days to 4 hours.
Wow, from 5 days to 4 hours.
Yeah. That efficiency saved them 2 million euros annually. And again, all while maintaining complete immutable audit trails for compliance.
And we're seeing similar technical transformations in marketing and sales automation too. Instead of just setting up simple static email drip sequences in a marketing platform, these agentic systems analyze a prospect's behavior across multiple channels in real time.
Yeah, they adapt on the fly.
Right, they dynamically personalize the timing and the messaging based on live data. They qualify leads through natural conversation, synthesizing demographic and intent-based data, and then automatically executing the next best action like booking a meeting or generating a custom pricing proposal just to accelerate the deal. It drastically reduces the burden on the sales team.
So when you look at those numbers across insurance, banking, and sales, the financial imperative to adopt this architecture is just undeniable.
Which brings us to the horizon. With the ROI proven so decisively today, what is coming by late 2026 that CTOs and business leaders need to prepare their infrastructure for right now?
This is where things get a bit sci-fi, but it's very real.
Yeah, because the guide zeroes in heavily on voice-enabled AI avatars. And to be clear, we aren't just talking about basic voice synthesis or deepfakes here. We're talking about combining natural language understanding with multimodal front-end ends to create these highly immersive real-time experiences. In Den Haag's professional services sector, these avatars are already conducting initial client consultations.
And they aren't just reading scripts.
Exactly. The multimodal models are synthesizing unstructured audio from client calls, reading the visual cues of the client via camera feeds, and dynamically adjusting their tone and conversational fluidity. They gather the complex requirements, structure them to actionable data for the back end, and schedule appointments with human specialists.
They completely remove the friction from the customer journey. You aren't forcing the user to navigate complex phone trees or, wait on hold for 40 minutes or read through dense FAQ pages. You are giving them a dedicated, highly knowledgeable digital concierge.
It raises a really interesting architectural question, though. Does this mean typing out text queries and navigating complex drop-down menus on a website will soon feel as outdated to us as using a rotary phone? Are we moving toward a purely conversational user interface?
It's highly likely for initial touch points, absolutely. But what's fascinating here is where this technology naturally leads on the back end. And that is predictive proactivity and multi-agent collaboration.
Okay, big terms.
Yeah, but basically, the future you need to prepare your infrastructure for isn't just a single avatar answering a customer's question via voice. It's an entire team of specialized autonomous agents coordinating with each other in the background.
Multi-agent collaboration. That sounds incredibly complex. Walk us through how that actually works in practice. How do multiple AI models talk to each other to actually solve a problem?
Well, imagine an ecosystem of domain-specific agents connected via a shared semantic routing layer. You don't just have one massive general-purpose AI trying to do everything. You have one lightweight agent trained purely on legal compliance, another on financial risk, and a third on customer experience.
Like a virtual department.
Exactly. When a complex customer request comes in, a triage agent assesses the intent. It then autonomously routes subtasks to the specialized agents. The finance agent checks the ledger via an API. It passes that data to the compliance agent, which verifies the proposed action against a local vector database of EU regulations. Once they achieve consensus, they hand the final approved action back to the customer-facing avatar.
So they're essentially functioning like a highly coordinated corporate team, just passing context back and forth securely.
Exactly. And because they are constantly monitoring live data streams, they achieve predictive proactivity. They anticipate a customer's need, or they identify a logistical bottleneck in your supply chain before the customer or the human employee even realizes there is a problem.
They fix it before it breaks.
Right. They spot the anomaly, coordinate the solution, and execute the fix proactively. By late 2026, the expectation is that these specialized collaborating domain agents will become the absolute industry standard for enterprise architecture.
And as that technology scales across borders, the regulatory landscape will have to adapt to support it rather than just restrict it.
That is the hope, yeah. The guide anticipates a strong trend toward regulatory harmonization. As these EU AI Act compliance standards become clearer and more standardized through technical blueprints, it will heavily reduce the friction of integrating these systems across different European markets. The localized, secure architecture being developed in Den Haag today will essentially become the operational standard for all of Europe.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of technical and strategic ground today, from the leap to multimodal agentic AI and the strict code-level realities of the EU AI Act, to localized data sovereignty, massive ROI gains, and the future of multi-agent collaboration. So what is the ultimate takeaway here?
It's a lot to process.
It is. For me, my number one takeaway is the sheer paradigm shift in how we have to view enterprise architecture. We are no longer simply managing software tools or purchasing IT solutions or, managing API keys. We are effectively onboarding, training, and managing an entirely new class of digital employees.
Oh,
And that completely changes the nature of corporate leadership and systems engineering. You have to think about governance, auditing, and oversight for your code the exact same way you would for a human workforce.
that is a really crucial shift in perspective. I think my number one takeaway focuses on the intersection of infrastructure and strategy. Data sovereignty and compliance by design are no longer just legal checkboxes you tick at the end of development cycle to appease a regulator.
Right.
In the 2026 European market, they are the foundational pillars of your competitive advantage. If you build transparent, localized, and strictly governed AI systems from the ground up, you earn enterprise customer trust. And in a world increasingly run by invisible, autonomous agents, trust is the absolute most valuable currency a business can hold.
Well said. You really can't bolt trust onto a broken system. You have to build it into the foundation. For more AI insights, visit AetherLink.ai. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you look at your own business operations and development roadmaps. If we are truly entering an era of predictive proactivity, a world where autonomous multi-agent systems constantly monitor your business data to identify and resolve crises before they ever actually happen, how do you measure the ROI of a disaster that never occurred? It really challenges us to completely rethink how we measure value in a world of invisible, autonomous problem solving. Until next time.